On September 9, 2009, Obama addressed Congress in support of health reform. Obama addressed the implications for undocumented immigrants, saying that there are those who claim that reform will ensure illegal immigrants. This is false. Joe Wilson yelled, "You lie." Ironically, this public dissension was in reality one of the few tenets upon which Republicans and Democrats could agree. Although the ACA will make a dent in the uninsured population, undocumented immigrants are unlikely to be insured. The ACA will restrict Medicaid access and bars them from the exchanges. Undocumented immigrants will comprise an increasingly disproportionate share of the uninsured. This seems to be time to consider whether or not our indifference to the health care of undocumented immigrants is justified, or whether we need to reevaluate our position. The fear of non-citizens getting access to health care from the Affordable Care Act was always unfounded, precisely because American health care policy has been structured by a sense of false universality that equates health care for all with health care for U.S. citizens. Reforms like the ACA have only worsened the exclusion of non-citizens from the health system, calcifying social stratification. and drop Yoli in 13. The ACA does not ensure coverage for any most valuable non-citizens unless there's exclude non-citizen groups from the definition of Americans, which is interchangeably with all the undocumented immigrants able to test for non-emergency care. The undocumented immigrants are testing inclusive of virtual all protections. Congress will clarify the health form and not help those who are not lawfully present. No other groups inclusion is so complete. The ACA statutory priorities glad the expensive language is a continuation of history. Policymakers push the healthcare for universal language into non-include groups into roles of empirical long-standing tension between the ideas of healthcare for all and healthcare for non-citizens. This offers democratic history, deep historical roots, exclusion way of thinking, cast by social economic certification legislation regarding Americans and non-citizen groups as separate exclusion to overcome legislation, exclusion definition of to expand the definition of American in the political discourse to include non-citizen groups. Advocates for universal healthcare must combat these biases. Right to be reality in healthcare for all. Social movements like single-payer healthcare are consolidating and gaining influence now. The twin crisis of ACA failure plus the horror of GOP repeal efforts make single-payer the inevitable result. 10 and 17, the ACA deepen the healthcare crisis, resulting into a fair market ways that makes the costly political havoc crisis away from the cure social medicine. The single-payer often dismissed. Now it looks like that so-turned reduced crisis become an opportunity for single-payer Republican conversation and mass political restructuring and breakthrough single-payer obstacles to facing an inevitable collapse of an unstable system. And there's an appetite for addressing fundamentals. But even the most radical proposals for single-payer are founded on the exclusion of non-citizens. The demand for Medicare for all still depends on an exclusionary vision of who constitutes all. Gomez in 17 as progressive considered universal health care is important to define the results of driving the health care right for all. That's essential to define all. One group of people so we exclude 20 million non-citizen immigrants in the U.S. Immigrants are born uninsured addresses inheritance and various Medicare for all bills. Not everyone is not people guaranteed coverage. The one states following and put in the discretion when which immigrant qualifies left away the white house leaving the fit of every immigrant's hand carrying whoever who's present and loving is litigate the question of who is all in Medicare for all. Rise attempt to separate immigration and health care. The details Medicare for all doesn't mean you create access. Exclusion of non-citizens from the health system compounds the violence of migration and institutionalizes vulnerability and devaluation of life. Our linkage of health and solidarity with non-citizens broadly contests the system of sovereign global governance and radicalizes the potential of health politics. Smith in 16 measures to deter individuals seeking social violence, places emphasis on protection of the refugee. The two priorities have a catastrophic effect on health violence and the stress of migration combated by anybody to access medical care. The exposure to institutional discrimination generates only human vulnerability. Solutions of vulnerable groups have a matter of global health significance. Increasing migration affect policy choices result in interventions called for global society, which depends on the inherently reduction of nation-state global governments. Does not put the on human life risk, between special solidarity and the protection of sovereign interest. Only with a radical reimagination of health in the system that reign health can be ensured the most vulnerable priorities above all. Violence and exclusionary responses to migration are strangling the globe with borders and walls, creating lifeboat states and death worlds. Contesting border regimes requires a radical politics of especially pro-migrant policy that refuses mere liberal inclusion of non-citizens in falsely idealized societies, rather attacks the idea of shared social space as a lifeboat where our existence depends upon winning a zero-sum contest for survival. Turhan in 17 overlap of migration flows, economic meltdown, environmental crisis, fuel problems, environmental even bleak future. They have apertures for new medical possibilities. The radical burst of migration requires some special pro-migrant welcoming policy which goes by well liberal inclusionist. Radical progressives should not take Western democracy faith value. This is different and shareable and internationalists welcome the moral skills being raised for today. Transport solidarity, focus on multicultural convey the importance that integrate the new governments and society. Instead, a radical approach needs to foster transformation of society. The Christian approach needs to stick life upon ethics and ensure an inhabitable planet for all life, but ethics begin life puts the death worlds of their borders. Pro-migrant solidarity is about taking back the political control of our lives, not about establishing safe haven. What is a progressive response to a planet adorned with barbed wires and walls from end to end? The friction between a liberal way of dealing with migration is a crisis that can be managed within a revolutionary progressive that embrace of migration is an opportunity to break from border system, going beyond the locking migration to become the way when the apocalypse come out and even the way it takes us to be cutting the fence and sabotaging the border. Thus, the United States federal government should provide universal health insurance without regard to citizenship or legal residence. The one EC advances an ethic of solidarity and relationality toward non-citizens, premised on the idea that while everybody is universally subject to the conditions that make life precarious, the condition of precarity is distributed unequally through access to institutions like healthcare. This ethic challenges sovereign notions of selfhood and political community, preserves difference rather than effacing it, and actively builds outward toward a larger criticism of the very logic of borders and sovereignty. Kells in 15 pros responsibility for non-members get more open and associate the challenges sovereignty and non-sovereignty structure the relationality that itself comes into being unavoidable relations with others. If they themselves ruins unable to cover all emergent human beings remain non-sovereign because they're vulnerable and morally dependent on their survival for incomprehensible social, political, economic networks, the loss of grief that are personal, universal, assuming that all humans born with some disparity can relate to the experience of change and bonds of solidarity with those who are affected by worse ways or names before the universality left brings precariousness as social ontological dimension of all embodied beings. Precariousness not make everyone equal in the ways people are exposed to precariousness is different than women identity by well-being presupposed to stay sovereign, not subject. They have a place of their own instead of the place of the self is only constituted by the act of welcoming. There is no space where the self is before the right of the other understanding of welcoming is what constitutes the self constitutes the right to own part of this world. The system after the Western countries criticize the critical interrogate exclusive right to territory. They recognize self as permanent. Like how question the foundation of state sovereignty is going to enable a critique of the practice that controls on to defend borders, ethics, and non-sovereignty demand, and citizens of Western countries to declare solidarity with migrants and refugees. It tells the political connections and not do not eradicate differences if no pre-established certain identities are available to pre-establish new creative to the force political engagement with the highest rule of solidarity political sentiment is not to seek to eradicate different political, social, economic, structure, or organized precarious, while precarious ontological precarities produced by structures of precarities found by access to institutions to safeguard the person by fighting healthcare, whether it's state provider of welfare, minimize the state, concentrate on military and police functions, discourse of others, motivate with other, appears the threat who would imperially benefit from the state systems of care, migrants, refugees, refugees, determines the access to labor, health, education, and Medicare care never less appears of precarity can create new political action and networks of solidarity. The knowledge of precarity is politically stratified means to be the intention to create a space where actors can meet equals and non-ultimate differences to be our community can establish solidarity with non-members or non-citizens. Renegotiates understanding of identities, opens a non-sovereign political sentiments of solidarity. Does neither presuppose we find things we share nor these other become members of our group. Especially given the ethical political solidarity with migrants, we are not dealing with the symmetrical relationship. I think we need to recognize another because somebody offers opposite best way to base migration ethics on who the other is cannot be of importance based on positive contributions to about the conversation. We said that we carry others within ourselves. We might refrain from preconceived ideas of identity. Solidarity lets us rethink political practices instead of a strong set of common goals or identity-based political action. Culture can be redefined as need-based that allows for more fluid, flexible political association. Numerous studies show that healthcare policy that provides insurance regardless of citizenship can reduce violent exclusion and implicit bias. They can provide a new vocabulary and insight into underlying motivation to more broadly produce better immigration policy. Matthew 10 for native population to immigration meant that when the immigrants became Americans, there was also immigration was based this actually offers new and tools of best law response to the undocumented migrants. The pressure, hatred, and violence can be reversed. Research have repeatedly shown that the groups can be introduced to see themselves as one change code in cognitive representation will cause a reduction in bias that we boss makers are just about my reforming law. The aspects in the case of accident healthcare law tonight, healthcare benefits are told me nonsense created a public health nightmare from such that the way they use new solutions to immigration healthcare restrictions that really intergroup bias that benefit from a shift in policy confronting assumptions about research on healthcare. We can evaluate reasoning and conversations about this actions or proceeding that is not included for individually they learn about underlying motivations about the society. This will advance immigration more effectively discussing competing interests among medical resources naturally animates immigration policy. The response to structural injustice and foreground policy changes in areas where we are particularly responsible for past harm and where changes of law and policy can have particularly beneficial effects. These criteria demand that the ballot prioritize the extension of healthcare to non-citizens while not foreclosing the value of addressing other injustices. Ailing work in 17 solidarity based structure by the presence of structural justice and newcomers often visit structural justice solidarity responsibilities can be met by supporting health and newcomers. The responsibility drive not limiting under common constitution but participating in institutional processes that produce structural justice for parameters of solidarity, responsibility, power, privilege, interest, and collective ability, efforts to target injustice which actually able to change people have enjoyed privileges. They ought to carry costs. There is solidarity-based responsibilities to carry the health costs of newcomers by invoking parameters. We can identify which instances of structural justice have priority. This is not to say we are only responsible when the parameters satisfied when they are part of a place to start, when it is necessary to prioritize. Parameters can be informed when about newcomers are responsible to carry health costs by providing health. Newcomers can once you're receiving countries have an enormous impact of all day health structural justice to de-circle when there's property affecting and clear steps can be taken that result in good health outcomes, healthcare available, and possible to modify social determinants of health laws contributing against newcomers can be changed in recognition health after systems to send a signal and warning great policy unburdened by group bias against tradition point of law and ethics to amount of behavior does not come easily to ensure the better conduct. Health insurance is a major determinant of access for health care for immigrants. Policy reforms that improve coverage can directly boost health outcomes. Edward in 14 health insurance is a significant determinant of healthcare access associated with health outcomes among immigrants and immigrants not entitled to receive health care. The health issue is affected by health policy reform. The ambiguity immigration possibility to stipulation of access services towards any investment in provision of health care for this population. Policy plays central is imperative to advocate for policy reform to improve immigrants' access to health care services and insurance coverage. The call for non-citizens health care must be articulated within a call for universal access that's truly universal. The 1EC rejects the idea of simply bringing excluded groups into an already fundamentally unequal system just to compete in a zero-sum contest for care. Rather, the 1EC positions the overall transformation of the healthcare system through the specific narrative of non-citizens exclusion, and both aspects are necessarily put forward radical alternatives to the status quo. Clark and 8, they're not clearly changing immigrant health care narrative will bring about fair health policy. Even immigrant states were removing eligibility criteria with only immigrants on one of the designated eligibility criteria and the narrative offers limited access because of the structural defects of our health system by engaging on the existing health paradigm access access. He reinforced us by that kind of long-term immigration is not a typical health system that between the draws line based on who is the most deserving. The research the immigrant health narratives used for creative assessment, creative opposed to reforming health system in structural ways that are inconsistent with inequality. With equality. Let me just mark that really quick. Inconsistent with equality. Yep.
All right.
Yep.
The 1AC reads that, quote, American healthcare has been structured by a false universality that equates healthcare for all with healthcare for U.S. citizens.
Yep.
What is a U.S. citizen?
Our argument is that the current definition of a U.S. citizen is someone who has been either born in the U.S. or naturalized in the U.S. We think that's a bad category.
Okay,
It
cool.
should not be used to understand, healthcare.
All right, your health evidence speaks to the need to challenge sovereignty.
Yep.
What is sovereignty and why do we need to challenge it?
So the Cal's evidence it doesn't necessarily define the word in like a dictionary sense, but it says one of the fundamental assets of sovereignty is our belief that we have a right to where we are and a right to decide who can be where we are. Our argument is that we should challenge the idea that we have the ability to determine who gets healthcare and who doesn't based on whether we perceive them to belong here or not.
Okay, I guess What imbues the USFG with the power to do the plan?
What
Why is
imbues the USFG
If
with
you've
the power to
criticized
do
sovereignty,
the plan?
why is the USFG your actor of choice?
We think the immediate act of the 1EC doesn't eradicate all sovereignty. We think the plan is one step toward a broader
The
vision.
plan
of
uses a
contesting that
sovereign
compels
actor.
evidence.
Why does that
Yeah,
not contradict
using
the
the
1EC?
sovereign is not the same thing as deciding that sovereignty
Okay,
is
so
anywhere
you
always
can
good.
use the
Or
sovereign
compels
but
evidence.
criticize sovereignty at the same time, and that is not contradictory.
Clarify something.
Mhm.
So there's a difference between using institutions and giving those institutions and imbuing them with sovereign power. The 1AC breaks down the very foundation of the category of sovereignty, the federal government's ability to determine who is legitimate to get goods, which is the foundational function of statehood.
Why does the plan then
which
use
means
the federal government to restate whether or not it has a right to do things? Why is that up to the federal government?
I'm sorry? What? I mean, healthcare now is defined by who the federal
I'm
government
actually going to move
decides
on.
has the right to.
The rest
sit
of
or
your
not.
health evidence, which describes your radical approach to politics, says, quote, loss and grief are universal. By assuming that all humans mourn when someone disappears, we can relate to the experience of strangers. How does that work, and how do we go about assuming that somebody's death is mourned?
That evidence says that the category of precariousness can be understood as universal, even if precarity is unequally distributed. We think that it is possible to say that people have connections to others, and that maybe that's not true for literally everybody, but we think that is a statement
I'm
that we
asking
can make
how
about
that
most
process
people.
of recognition happens. How do you look at someone and assume you have a relationship to other people?
It doesn't require.
Is your argument just that
a
that's
relation-
always a thing?
Well,
that the
our argument
1AC
isn't that
makes
we
that
have
a
an
thing?
inherent relationship to everybody else.
Okay.
Well, we sort of have said that, but it's not based on the idea of this sort of category of loss. Our argument is that we should start with the idea that loss is universal and then move to the unequal distribution of precarity, which is the way that institutions distribute goods like healthcare. Our argument is that relationality shapes subjectivity, that we are not ourselves until we come into contact with somebody else. But that is not a category based on recognition, but rather it can be based on the lack of recognition or the understanding that there is some gulf between ourselves and others. It doesn't require recognition for that category to sort of be activated.
It's behind you.
If everyone else is ready, so am I. All right. The affirmative is centered the debate on the question of what the United States should do. We instead ask the question of whether civil society should exist at all. Anti-blackness is a fundamental antagonism of the United States, and any affirmation of civil society is an affirmation of Black Death. Wilderson and 10, the only ethical grammar available in modern politics, draws our attention to the violence that underwrites modern apparel's capacity to think, act, exist spatially, and temporally. Radicals and progressives could not dismiss revolutions and ethics because they do not make the tendency in case of the U.S. with an ethical formation still hope to maintain credibility as radicals and progressives law, and its enforcers have no ethical saying that the presence of Blacks is still possible to dream of an unfair ethics. The answer is no in the sense that what cannot be articulated as political discourse in the streets doubly were closed on, but yes in the sense that even the most taciturn historical moments of Black suffering breaks in on this foreclosure of grammar political ethics with regards to political discourses unspoken. This notwithstanding political discourse seems an ontological grammar structure of suffering. The structure of suffering crowds out other structures. Ontological suffering stand in antagonistic rather than conflictual relation with one another. The radical fringe of political discourse must a little more than the passionate dream of civic reform and social distance, which when approaches and police and considerably the intellectual protocols now and play to hide rather than make explicit the grammar of suffering, which generates the use and its foundational antagonism state affairs exacerbates the ontological death of slave and the savage because I think political and intellectual discourse currently necessitating sanction is authorized by irreconcilable demands of academic inquiries that's no more effective in pursuing revolutionary critique than the legislative antics of loyal opposition. Is how scholars help civil society recuperate and maintain stability. But this stability is a state of emergency, and the affirmatives humanist politics are anti-Black because humanity's political ontology relies on the foundation of Black social death. Their contingent resistance to structures of oppression trades off with an analysis of gratuitous freedom. Wilderson and 10. An entire race stand is socially dead in relation to the rest of the world. Child slavery is a condition of ontology stuck to the African like Velcro to the extent that we can think the essence of whiteness, the essence of life, we think their essences, the structure of master slave relation slavery is cathedral, as advanced from war which describes the condition and when we subject to a word with free confers the African body of life, flesh be late middle ages gave rise to an ontological category which in disparate members of the human race, the race of humanism could not produce itself without the simultaneous production of that walking destruction which became known as the Black Orgy, a symbiosis between the political ontology of humanity, social life, life, slavery is foundational to modern humanism, the object of freedom is the hub of humanism's infinite conceptual trajectories, so these trajectories are finite, and in a sense they are predicated on the idea of freedom from some contingency that can be named political discourse recognizes freedom, structuring ontological course, it is out to recognition by managing through political experience that immediately lose this ontological magnitude of life. Freedom is an ontological rather than experiential question for writers. No one can place a black freedom would be hyperbolical freedom, the title freedom from the world, freedom from humanity, freedom from everyone. Whose freedom has never been a trajectory of human thought, which is why infinite trajectories of freedom that emanate from humanism's hub are anything but infinite, for they have no line of like leading to the slave. Specifically, the average post-racial liberals and their push for universal healthcare is a solution only so means racial conflict. They ensure color-neutral healthcare solutions that deepen white racial resentment, but fail to address the specificity of anti-blackness as a disease afflicting black bodies, wise and 10 persistent inequalities between whites and black can be best addressed by race-neutral universal programs of all the two main pillars, racial inequalities, were mostly the result of race-neutral factors like deindustrialization, adequate and investment in public goods. Second pillar was white backlash made necessary for universal race-neutral solutions. Obama maintaining universal coverage are also the best way to close the gaps. Universal programs to reduce racial disparities in health are also wrong about political value. Race-neutral policy cannot possibly solve persistent racial inequalities. Racial gaps in health are unrelated to coverage, affordability, or healthcare access. Black women with culture have higher rates of infant mortality than white women who dropped out after the 8th grade. We have to look at the cumulative impact of racism of black bodies over time. Universal policy cannot help to remedy problems. Post-racial illusion and worsen disparities. They refusal to talk openly about racism in Americans to rationalize disparities and continue to use policy efforts like universal health care. Truly will support for progressive social policy is precisely when racialized aspects face users' speech biology remain so label of the service that the ability to control people's ability to post-racial working class. So biases are often at the root of opposition to go unchecked, and color neutral healthcare is prohibition is epistemologically flawed because it ignores the ways racism operates as a social determinant of health that causes improper diagnosis and bad treatment, which ensures black people distrust the healthcare system. Only race-conscious healthcare prevention can resolve the root cause of racial health disparities. And George Frieden, the health and race neutral are no longer dependable. Health illness systematically affects some groups without becoming rectified only by deliberately attending cultural factors, cultural authenticity, profound to affect health, mental health, coping, mental, socio-economic status to apply related health problems and mental illness would be hampering our ability to provide with effective treatments and our ability to deliver those treatments, to ignore race, to ignore culture, and to amounts to a massive collective dereliction of professional duty. And black positionality renders their notions of counter-hegemony and resistance and coherence. Blackness is the absolute side of dereliction. This debate should center on the total disconfiguration of civil society. It's the only way to liberate the slave. Is thus we advocate a program of complete disorder. Wilderson and 10. Slavery is the great leveler. This places structurally impossible to perform this outside by articulations of hegemony. No other body functions so completely as a repository of complete disorder. Black is the side of absolute dereliction. Black body functions as a map of gratuitous finds through civil society is possible. Black is the side of absolute dereliction, level symbolic. This is an experience without analog, a past without heritage. They have been and remain today, even those anti-racist movements invested elsewhere. Its condition of possible just resistant from instances and negative dialectic politics and refusal to affirm a program of complete disorder. One must embrace its disorder. One's politics are to be underwritten by a desire to take down this country. Few so-called radicals desire to be embraced and elaborated by the disorder and coherence of blackness. That work will fail. For always work for a position of coherence. The positionality of the black subject gestures towards the disconfiguration of civil society. If the black subject beckons with the incoherence of civil war, they reclaim black is not a positive value, but it's politically enabling side of absolute dereliction. A black spectrum remains an endless antagonism that cannot be satisfied via reform and reparation, but that must nonetheless be pursued to the death. And the app doesn't resolve discrimination in health, just discrimination in healthcare. Policing strategies like stop and frisk produce ill health effects. The app can't solve them because it requires medical professionals to adopt a color-neutral approach to service provision. Silver Shooting 13, stop and frisk affect people who fear they could be next black people. Most notably, this does not reduce the risk of harassment. When conditions social justice affect this many people, prompt poor health outcomes, risk passes down generations. Racism materializes in poor health, and the app starts from the wrong starting point. They theorize race relations from a white, non-white divide in which racial oppression and violence emanates from state saturated in whiteness. However, this ignores the singularity and structural nature of slavery in the middle path in politics to speak up from the starting point of the black, non-black divide. Only the all can do this. This is the reason the permutation can never capture the all proper and 11 black, non-black framework is much more useful for analyzing racial realities, both for pragmatically addressing issues of criminalization, surveillance, policing, incarceration, deportation. One of the commentaries for not dealing with anti-black racism is to claim that African Americans are not the only ones who experience racism or state violence. This intimate that some say could animate this very gathering black existence not represent the totality, the total reality of racial formation, but it does relate to the totality. It indicates the repressed truth of political and economic system. There's no such thing as black citizenship. The myth of black citizenship scaffolds immigrant rights activism as well as the academic scholarship that supports it. Black people are now not guilty of being black and thus criminalized, which is ontological, not behavioral, cannot be conflated with subsumed with affirmative comment against immigrant rights advocates case. A. The plain causes ICE to target clinics and hospitals. Past arrest approved permanent in 17 while in a hospital. Border Patrol agents showed up in the waiting room. City could arrange for officers to escort the parents through the checkpoint to Corpus. The agents, when they arrived, they would be arrested and put in deportation proceedings. Shows the lengths of which the Trump administration will go to round up people in the country illegally. Border Patrol followed the ambulance officers, followed the father to the bathroom, the cafeteria, and asked the mother to leave the the door open when she breastfed Isaac. Immigration enforcers are chipping away to places formerly considered safe zones. They removed a woman with a brain tumor from a Texas hospital quarterback, and it should be no solvency, even if no raids. Ratcheting up of deportations creates a chilling effect that means immigrants don't seek out the care they need. Swellets in 17 Trump changes are keeping immigrants out of hospitals and clinics. The acts of broadly expand the category to people targeted for deportation. Immigrants are still scared to go to the doctor. Twice as many patients had Normal canceled their appointments last week. Some saying they were afraid of immigration officials. In Arizona State Legislature passed a bill expanding the authority of police officers to investigate individuals they suspected of being in the U.S. illegally. Researchers know that people stop showing up for medical care. Passing the bill is associated with less healthcare utilization. Providers describe a drop in health maintenance, such as regular doctor visits, diabetes education, vaccines, prenatal care, HIV education, and procurement of medications as a result of the law. And PCPs are key to equity. Without a physician workforce that serves the underserved, they remain segregated and neglected care zones. Even they have insurance. Fasella and 11 Bell's primary care is the cornerstone for the more equitable health care payments, although will not be sufficient to address the maldistribution of primary care for the poor and minority patients are at the greatest risk for lacking primary care. Strengthening primary care safety is critical to ensuring access after expansion of insurance coverage. And an underlying systemic PCP shortage plus an aging population with intensified care needs makes the AF coverage expansion catastrophic. Inundating an already strained healthcare system with newly insured will not translate into actual care provided. Snavely and 16 is alarming as a decreasing supply of nurses as the demand for the is expected to increase significantly, resulting in a shortage unlike any country since the census. Proliferation of the elderly population government start to increase and need for chronic care will intensify given the working population expected to find aging population suffering from multiple chronic disease requiring additional nursing care hours expansion and insurance coverage not directly translate to actual care provided doesn't inundate an already straight system with newly unsure now the potential cause workforce shortages to become catastrophic. PCPs are already squeezed by unmanageable patient loads. Coverage expansion puts retention of those providers at risk. NACRA and NACRA 16 abandons our physician will continue to grow faster than supply. The resulting proximity measurable coverage public or not-for-profit hospitals continue with heavy load squeezing or work out balloon physician will have negative consequences in health. Insurance relies on historically and anti-black contractual obligations and underwriting methods that were literally developed around slave ownership. Corporeal insurance is a deeply violent approach could not be accepted as neutral. Werkheimer and 11 that quality property and parts of legal discourse and insurable ownership still Hansi methods responsible derived from underwriting standpoint. History mass murder slave insurance leaving us the present deeply irresponsible test masquerading as moral contracts that song separately calling will determine that slaves who are not yet sick with debt should be thrown overboard since it would increase the odds of healthy surviving would enable the recovery full insurance reimbursement for the already valueless card with the zombie disorder. They seemingly well-defined boundaries of what is human, what is an asset to give new public vocabulary abolition of primary responsibility can human beings truly be proper not replaceable. To what extent does society have an obligation to impose moral limits on the possessive individual? And health cannot exist in a regime built on social death. Villain and 16 slow death physical wearing out of population the deterioration finding condition they experience in historical existence. Death does not occur in spectacular events but in ordinary but all contours of the intimacy of the everyday produced by this first process like humiliation, degradation, immigration with death makes itself known in ways that are feast but all unremarkable or his fall to prison doctor prescribed knowledge for a woman with cold diagnosed another one's cancer sore throat aging slow death where the everyday years towards a premature ending incorrect diagnosis of the malnourishment unexpected sickness an unexpected sickness and a small pain in the chest.
Ready? You made the argument that race-conscious healthcare provision can resolve the root cause of racial health disparities. Can you explain to me how that works?
I mean, so I kind of think the argument I made was the reverse, that just taking race into an account of healthcare distribution doesn't actually deal with the ways that anti-blackness sort of...
Well, the tag of your Barrett card is only race-conscious healthcare provision can resolve the root cause of racial health disparities. You said that. Can you explain to me what race-conscious healthcare delivery is?
I mean...
All right,
maybe
I can move on.
wrote that
The
backwards.
alternative...
I'm pretty sure that the card itself...
Yeah, okay.
That
The
card says
alternative
that
is this
just the
Wilderson card about...
incorporation of the factor of race into healthcare.
I gotta move on. The Wilderson
Okay.
card about absolute incoherence and the disorder of blackness. How does this alternative make sense in a debate when you have to convince judges of the strength of your position? What does it mean to be disorderly when articulating a position in debate?
It means affirming the end of the world.
Really? Because, like, so I guess my question is...
If your understanding of what is disorder is like we have to start flipping over tables in order to prove that we're really committed to this end
No,
of
that
the
wasn't
world,
my question.
that's
My
kind
question
of
is, what,
a very...
so is your
sorry, it's a
argument
very
just that-
narrow understanding of what it means to understand and read the world through this ontological
Well, so, okay,
lens.
here's my question then, is when Wilderson talks about the incoherence of blackness or complete disorder, et cetera, all that means is just call for the end of the world?
I mean, a program of... So, we're also going to say that a call for the end of the world also kind of entails the ontological rereading of the AF that we've done, all right? So I feel like you're
What is
taking
the
these things in a very
ontological
literal...
rereading of the AF?
So that's our description of the way that health actually kind of comes into being. That's our analysis of the ways that healthcare, the notion of insurance itself, begin with the middle passage.
Got it. The Snavely card, which is the card that increases in insurance, are bad because of the increased demand for shortages. The only card that the line you highlight says cause workforce shortages to become catastrophic. He's citing the Heritage Foundation, who's super conservative and was arguing against the Medicaid expansion. Why should we trust them?
Well, I mean, Snavely's still making an argument about, first of all, Snavely's not the Heritage Foundation.
Yeah, but like you literally, it's just a quote from the Heritage Foundation is what you've highlighted.
I haven't highlighted that. Also, Snavely's not the Heritage Foundation. Snavely's still citing a bunch of other people who are in particular concerned with what happens to marginalized communities in the wake of healthcare expansion. Snavely's using these arguments to say all of the, to make the argument about the ways that, it actually is, because that's about the fact that when marginalized communities gain or supposedly gain access to primary care providers, it causes those primary care providers to become stressed and overburdened, which means they quit. So like you're just wrong.
Wilderson card, by what methodology have you come to the conclusion that there is some paradigmatic split between the position of blackness and the rest of civil society?
By what methodology?
Yeah. How do you know?
I mean, so Wilderson kind of,
I'm good.
do you want the answer?
No, sorry.
You don't.
The impact sovereign violence produces death world ways encountered militant border regimes that are right access to basic goods like healthcare. The one easy demand healthcare being provided regardless of citizenship is a critique of that sovereign system. There's not much discussion of sovereignty in the 1 and C, which means that this impact is big in matters. The hospital deportations are the plan solves that it catalyzes the broader immigration reforms. Overwhelming research on cognitive bias shows that bias can be reduced through change representation through the law providing access to healthcare for non-citizens real-life interests and reduces the violence of outward discrimination. That's the Matthews evidence, which is highly specific to the mechanism of the 1EC. The burden evidence statement says that border patrol officers threatened hospitals, not that it was effective. There aren't going to be any hospital deportation. Hospitals are missing. Accident Fisher, 17 Fisher, community advocates, all people that have access to their medical decisions, but some identified approximately places. Borders for some kids, such as the rest of the patient can't be easily seen and measure. Hospitals for hospital property, station hospitals for the front of the Washington status is not relating for kids, but the city agree that doesn't mean hospitals send to the patients. The 1EC ethic of relationality and solidarity would certainly reject that kind of bordering and policing and extends the act of persistence against medical deportation to the internationalists. 17 the Trump identity report that is able to get to the Senate to understand the major strengths and the government today. 17 targets of medical facility government understand the right to join healthcare that workers just have to bring. Hundreds of this part of the defense to try to put in medical deportation. The argument about the chilling effect does not assume the plan which has the government give healthcare to immigrants, which means it's sufficient to resolve that. We also don't need to win that every single immigrant goes with the availability. That is a powerful contestation to sovereignty and breaks the very foundational role of the state. The PCP's providers argument the plan is a critique of the denial of care that tears people into more or less legitimate citizenship. This extensive critique of hospitals failing to put themselves in communities. We also saw because hospitals lack a financial incentive to be in communities with low levels of insurance. The plan provides universal insurance, which creates profitable reimbursement structures. In these communities, Edwards says that health insurance access is that significant determinant of treatment. The evidence is also written with quotes from the Heritage Foundation. You should reject them because they're conservative hacks who are trying to move an ideological agenda to get the governor out of healthcare. Now the argument about slavery insurance, their arguments about slavery insurance is in the context of life insurance taken on slaves, which is not analogous to current health insurance, which is good. The plan says having health insurance structures like opportunities health. Now the last argument, providing perfect health is not a condition for voting now. We have said it is good for immigrants to have healthcare and that this disrupts sovereignty. The Edwards evidence, Edward 8 Senator said that that's sufficient. There are Dylan and allows us to produce bonds that resolve the impact of anti-black violence and produce new grammars to understand it. Grounding this in specific policy actions can shift the window of political possibility to structurally modify power relations, but the lack of specific demands by the alternative means they can't do that. That the council evidence institutions are good, and I'm going to preempt the argument that because we used to state that, that means that we can't solve sovereignty. We take away the ability to be sovereign, because the foundational function of the state is to determine who is a legitimate and or not a legitimate recipient of goods in a geographical place. The plan says that there's no legitimate kind of defining feature of that permutation to both the forced choice to make the debate about anti-black violence rather than the non-citizen violence to be taught outside the walls of the academy. Center analysis on anti-blackness, and despite the reduced nature of the violence against non-citizens, the alternative is the understanding of complex source violence and possible Marquette 16 the majority of Americans include also white teenagers, police, work drivers, just as the public information state of the car, the right to defend the sovereignty of the world, the same fashion, the world of police, immigrants, the state, nation, violence, black on our reasons, the Egyptian ministry, the really poverty, the Young, academic social knowledge, the struggles for material rights, the complex, the river, the black border, the black America, the academic search, the words that the identity for the use of words, the academy, this is not about the anti-black reasons, the water, the words, the vision, the more relational dynamic form of all these academic reasons, the further discussion, where the things with their heads, academic race, and the way black is produced with the non-cultural word versus certain of the financial nature, and how it's like this, the theory is related to the war, or one by the struggles of our name, expiring of the versus the comparison of the menstruating in history, there are presented about the worship factors that are essentialized in the pursuit of the Timothy, so we're looking for long things to jump that in your looking at, slightly which I think is important to the ability to see that, but the person that would overlook the division between African American population and that African American living closer to the south of the region, the 20th century region, the high risk African American living in half of the remote, but commonly based on the police brutality over the nation, the legend why the person results in rapid before choice station between taking the restrict to the black American children export the further legally on the shoe black America, now see the point that African American being victimized by a Latino invasion, LinkedIn, links. First is the affirmation of civil society. This is totalizing what he sees in the affirmation of civil society, a fundamental degree on civil society's violent history, genocide, colonialism, the forced migration of the middle class individual point the programmers for transformative for the transformative end is something that is good. The result that the humanism arguments we disrupt the current humanism by forming a relational ethic, which being rather than the current categories of citizenship, which necessitated humanism has to have an exclusion after pessimism is a historical of epistemology, not ontological truth. Humanity in the world are open ended categories, transform one political spirit, order, three two people are for citizens, not political people, that is speaking for social humanity, making the practice that just the way discussion to the rather than the other political city is the world not even with the first people, what is in that people that are social that is the large was made that in the social therapy, each of the most involved of that people are becoming a religion to other strong community, new and measured by people are fostering they're going to have a relationship, trying to get people that need to go to the other to that, because it's maybe this is the thought of the community, you are community, you are community, talking about the house jobs, running around talking about speaking for it, continue to hear you and the first bunch of people trying to find you close to you, things like possibility, custom knowledge, or the knowledge categories where you're really in this knowledge, but every door, or access to the further issues, causing people watch or without ever, whenever you have some accepting people would say, I'm supposed to do that, I have this, I'm not Martin, do some branding, anything else, political action, causing the officers are interested in making, you're going to talk about transforming the world, and what you need is commitment and radical humanism, committed to remake the world as necessary, intelligent, and history construct situated humanism, the ways of pitfalls of the status quo, Mulder 16, this is in struggle, and the radical community, for us, and for the next, maybe for this world, because this will go to the humanism, this fashion, that would love all of this, all this structure, this is a history, the common future, team, and that's a journey, and secret, the same problem, about you, show me people watching, and watching, check, touching, all the mythology, or the collective view, the new false history, and all situated humanism, but it's working, just certain building capitalism, modernism, like the community, national, and here, people, so on, then a moment, the Western, journey, radical political traditions, could no one can be figured as Western marked at Western, the coastal racialism arguments were not race neutral, the 118, explicitly acknowledged the different impacts of the status quo, differential impacts of the status quo, because it said that precarity is differentially impacted, i.e., people like black people and non-citizens have differential impacts, and a lot of those brought black people the worst. This evidence assumes that we said healthcare care can reduce disparities between black and white people, which is not the claim we have made. We've said that healthcare can resolve disparities for non-citizens, and that it's sufficient to do that, and that it can set sovereignty, but health insurance is that significant determinants for those non-citizens. Universal single payer is also no, which is the argument they have conceded, which means it's entirely a question of how we orient ourselves to it. The plan says that addressing the differential impacts and the falseness of status quo universality is good growing appetite, and because there's a growing appetite for disrupting the Obamacare system right now. This is evidence the stop and frisk argument. Stop and frisk is bad. The app can totally agree with that. We do. Their evidence says that a material is important health, not that healthcare can't solve it, and it's something that the APIC plan says is bad because that sort of sovereign policing is bad. The black, non-black, white binary, the Marquette evidence, antithesis, ontological pessimistic views, blackness, that blackness, solely incoherent, suffering, and oppression, limited possibilities for black lives, and existentialist understanding of knowledge, black resistance,
this challenge is sufficient and informs the greater percent of candidates of blackness little. 17, who dictates social policy to the bill on using the bill and supports the article claims national clause supposed to be tell African Americans go back to African Americans capital ways of supporting a group in which people are humanized.
What's that part of the document?
That card is the little part.
So what do you mean by the ability to be sovereign?
The ability to be sovereign, right? So sovereignty, the way that the state gets power and legitimacy to claim sovereignty is through this ability of citizens to, its ability to identify a category of citizens, identify the provision of goods that it considers those citizens deserving of, and then to say that only those citizens get access to it. The 1AC says that institutions, it is not the role of institutions to determine legitimate and illegitimate recipients of things like healthcare goods. We obviously, our ethic also would say that that
It
extends
sounds to
to
me a little bit like you've redefined the role of institutions. My question is, how does that destabilize them?
Well, we destabilize sovereignty. We didn't say we destabilize institutions. However, the permutation and
So
our acknowledgement and
what
our
does the institution of the USFG look like minus sovereignty?
without sovereignty, it's entirely driven by people's demands, and it functions only as a provider of goods, not as a
What do you
determiner
mean?
of like citizenship.
Let's unpack
status.
driven by people's demands a little bit.
Sure.
Kind of just sounds like democracy like we have it.
No.
Why is it different?
It doesn't get to determine like citizenship status. Like we think that the category of citizenship.
So what does that mean? Just like people who aren't citizens can vote too now? Like,
we think that like there shouldn't be citizenship. Anybody who wants to be here should get to be here. The federal government
All right.
provides goods in the same way that like a hospital does. It just have to provide insurance, so that's the
you've
insurer, not as like a
talked about non-citizens a lot.
Yeah.
Who are they?
non-citizens are people who are neither naturalized here or were born here. I
Are-
think that definition
Are
is
black
different.
people non-citizens?
We think that in a way they are, and the little and Marquez evidence substantiates that because it says that the federal government has created categories of legitimate citizens, and because of the forced migration of black people during the Middle Passage, there's a perception in American culture that like people tell black people to go back to Africa, and that sort of forced migration and understanding
Okay.
of what the way sovereignty contributed to that violence is
So-
something that the 1AC contributes to an understanding.
Even in a world where we don't care about the category of citizenship, there's still something different that makes black people less than in society.
No, our argument is that our contestation of sovereignty can inform understandings and resolutions of anti-black violence.
One more
which is what I
question.
just explained.
Per your Gordon evidence, how do you explain the shift of slavery to the Jim Crow era to the prison industrial complex?
Well, so Gordon's argument is that the fact that those changes occurred and the fact that the state had to research in different ways proves that it was threatened. The changes in material conditions prove that anti-blackness is a project, not the world in a kind of ontological and calcified state.
What's
because it
the
had to
reason
change
you
the
believe
ways
that?
its project operated. What?
What's the reason you believe that if so far the project always just changes the way it operates instead of sort of
I guess
achieving
like
difference?
Gordon's argument is that like you are the epistemological categories, and beyond epistemology, what we need to look at is the commitment of black people to continue fighting.
Are we good, Ricky?
Yeah.
It'll be the critique. Yeah, Ricky's gonna do framework, so start right below that. There's an overview, so I guess do it that way as well.
Is there a document?
Yeah, I'm sending it.
Okay.
Are you kidding?
Marx, those that occupy the ontological position of social death. The African went onto the ship and came out black. Natal alienation, general dishonor, gratuitous violence, cast black in opposition to human and cohere the structure of liberal democracy. Anti-blackness changed the name, but not in function. From chattel slavery to Jim Crow to the prison industrial complex, we move from one incomplete regis to the next in the name of challenging material violence, while blackness remains as the underside of modernity. Each time liberal democracy claims that progress is happening, change is on the way, while reformulating its material reality according to the rubric of anti-blackness. The impact of this is cruel optimism, the psychic violence which accompanies being told to try harder over and over, carrying the burden of racial progress for a country structured upon black death. Now their focus on contingent reforms to maintain the black suffrage as an incomplete body. Instead, you should orient your ballot towards gratuitous freedom. Anything short of this pathologizes blackness, and should be rejected. Now they the sovereignty, our link to sovereignty answers their first link towards sovereignty is made through opposition to blackness, to be able to make the call for someone else to choose whether or not to feed or house slaves, or to make the choice for whether or not someone has health care, is to be imbued with the power of subjectivity and sovereignty, which was ripped away from Africans during the Middle Passage. The impact to this is psychic violence because it asks an anti-black structure for freedom or forms of health care or in forms of incomplete regis, which was our cruel optimism impact that I just made the overview, which also internally turns their criticism of sovereignty because it proves how they reinvest in those things. Now, second is the bonds that they recreate of their former methodology, or their methodology is a bad thing. This is Wilderson and 11, and it's about their Klebs evidence. They attempt to draw the reader into a identification relationship with pain, speaking bodies, of course, readers who will identify with the subject's projected narrative and must proceed, therefore, by means of appropriate being black victims of black suffering is paraded as opposed to engage reflective on, so as to provide stimulating satisfaction as a reader leave voyeuristic gaze in this way. The narratives of black suffering mimic not only the narrative tragedies of police confessions, but the editing tragedies of Hollywood cinema. Once the body is in our narrative tragedies of pruning duration, and editing tragedies which stayed on spectacle of the expense of reflection are cinematic, a bond between the murderous anti-black projecting civil society and the emancipatory narratives of Lee Ellie soldiers, where David Mayer describes the bonding of homophobic response to the black and imaginal. Furthermore, they highlight the difficulty in determining where white affiliation ends and state affiliation begins. Fanon argues that there is no disproportion between the life of the family and the life of the nation, but how does aggression work through those not to implode the nation, but within collective compromise? What Fanon explains a challenge, an outlook which forces accumulation in the form of aggression, and the form of aggression can be released. Now, they have made institutions good argument. The entirety of the overview answers this, and every link argument I have. The reason why they're engaged with institutions is a bad engagement with institutions. Now, the plan does not say, yes, the USFG. Yes, they do make the statement that the USFG cannot choose whether or not to give people things based on citizenship rules. But our argument is that they always articulate those rules via the codes and texts of liberal democracy, but rather the criticism is about what codes and texts are unspoken, what is not written into the Constitution. aka, even though black people are written into the Constitution as citizen, they are always cast as non-citizen. They're not given the right of presumed innocence, but rather they are presumed guilty because despite their textual inclusion into the Constitution, society is founded in opposition to them, which results in forms of anti-black violence. Their kind of reliance upon a textual definition of sovereignty disavows the extra-textual existence of anti-blackness, which is what allows the 1AC to reinvest, which is what allows the 1AC to reinvest in those things. Now, they say permutation and cross-play. There are forms of dissent from the overview. Their limited entitlement cohere civil society. Second is permutation, either links or service on the 1AC defensive reforms undermines our ability to clash because the 1AC is the only locus point for negative ops, which is a voter. We heard its education. Third is the humanism dissent. Their push for universal healthcare as an all-encompassing solution to disparity obfuscates the racial lines that dictate healthcare inequality. That's our white evidence. Anti-blackness is the code that scripts health disparities. It controls how medicine gets allocated, how diagnosis happens, and where resources are spent. Our epistemic orientation has the explanatory power to grapple with the specific functionality and application of anti-black health disparity. Now that turns the affirmative. The act describes their politics as a kind of all-inclusive medical sanctuary that all people can access, when in actuality they create a policy that reinvests in libidinal descriptions of black people. Medical centers become policing functions to regulate and control black populations. Hospitals become data collection points, and medical prescriptions become apparatuses to exterminate undesirable populations. This has been true throughout the history of black medical relationships with civil society, where black people have constantly experimented on, over and underdiagnosed and consumed in line with erotic feeling desires. Now that makes their impacts inevitable, just like the welfare rollbacks of the 90s, which happened after the racial gains of the civil rights movement, where white people decided they would rather have no welfare than provide assistance to black folk. Implementation of healthcare will result in a racist targeting of black folk for mooching off of or overusing the healthcare system, which fuels racial animosity and means healthcare is reprivatized. That racial animosity also turns the affix that leads to increased border patrol and because it leads to things like increased border patrol and deportation policies. Now, second is the immigration link specifically answers this piece of Marquez evidence. Our piece of NOPR evidence, the one that asks the question of what does it mean to be included in healthcare? What does it mean to be a citizen but not considered a person or not given subjectivity? They are the perfection of liberalism and cosmopolitanism, a folding in of immigrants in opposition to blackness, aka they are what allows people to say that there is a hardworking African immigrant who deserves healthcare because they work hard. They have kind of a relationality. We can understand their kinship relations, but those people are always formulated in opposition to the lazy black vote, which is their piece of NOPR evidence. Our NOPR evidence also answers their black-white binary argument. This piece of Marquez evidence makes because NOPR argues that anti-blackness operates on a sliding scale. It's not black versus right, but rather anti-blackness versus the world, aka people who are closer to darker skin colors experience more violence because of the structure of anti-blackness and slavery, which means it's not the sort of binary that their Marquez evidence describes, and it does provide a way for us to understand things like the suffering of people who are deemed non-citizen or people who are deemed immigrants. Now, the impact of that immigrant link is anti-black, pro-immigrant sentiments, the idea that hardworking immigrants should come and contribute to society, but that black people who don't work hard aren't someone who should contribute, and that the police should surveil them. It's also things like unequal. It also results in things like unequal medications. Right? Schools are supposedly equal. Everyone supposedly has access to equal or universal health care, but that equal access never materializes in the form of schools because of things like the way that money is distributed and taxation policies operates in neighborhoods. Now, that also turns the opposite. It proves that their healthcare policies are unequal and they're still disparate. There are still disparate effects across health. Now, their relational ethic is bad. That was the piece of Wilderson evidence that I read at the top. They read this piece of Gordon evidence first. This Gordon evidence is about ontology, not political ontology. Our piece of Wilderson evidence makes the argument that political ontology is constructed by the events of the Middle Passage, that it was not necessarily ontologically predetermined, written into being or biology, but rather that these political events constituted anti-blackness and formed liberal democracy, cosmopolitanism, humanism in opposition to blackness, which means that it is not the kind of fatalism which their Gordon evidence is about. Now, second is the affirmative maintains anti-blackness. It just changes how anti-blackness operates, which is all the link work that I did above. Now, they read this piece of Wilder evidence, say radical humanism is good. They are not the form of radical humanism that they wish they were. Those are all of the link arguments which explain the ways that their forms of humanism replicate all of the same traps of traditional humanism that they want to claim that they are not. Now, the one I see acknowledging difference or disparity does not mean that they don't try to resolve it with a universal solution. Our arguments about humanism are about how they've applied a universal solution to resolve the problem of healthcare. Not that they have necessarily said that there are not health disparities in the status quo, but that their solution is a universal one, which presumes an equal plane of subjectivity. Now, we do not limit black social life. Social life is lived within the shadow of social death. Our Wilderson evidence indicates that certainly forms of social life do exist. Right? Black people obviously have kinship relations. They obviously have forms of resistance. They obviously do things in the world, but our Wilderson evidence indicates that civil society, liberal democracy, humanism, etc., have an inability to recognize those forms of kinship. aka before the police officer pulls the trigger, he does not think about the fact that Trayvon Martin or Renisha McBride has a mother, a family, friends, etc. Those forms of relationality do not make themselves apparent to members of civil society. The impact of this career evidence is also non-unique because people already don't associate positive traits with blackness. Now, the alternative is kind of positive. It's about this is about giving value or appreciating negativity. It's the end of the world, an embrace of complete disorder to disrupt the humanistic script that maintains the grammar of civil society. Rather than call for contingent reforms, materialist reprieve, we wallow in the impossibility of black life. It's an unflinching process of structural analysis that exposes the ethical impossibility of the world to give reprieve to the black subject. The moment of realization creates a possibility for black life to exist. Their demands for us to give you a legalistic or civic map for what the end of the world looks like proves the impossibility of the permutation because it misses the point of pessimism. Their cries for civic legibility are the very things we critique. The alternative is the willing openness to death in pursuit of gratuitous freedom. In a world where the black subject is regulated to ontological damnation, there is only a chance that the end of the world is better. Now, this last piece of little evidence reads belonging through the lens of land, which proves our kind of conflict versus the antagonism of arguments. aka immigrants or non-citizens can be included when we destroy the borders between us and the land. There's a kind of reconciliation of the conflict there that can happen, but rather our evidence indicates that that kind of shared land or return is always premised in opposition to the lack of culture and heritage that is never granted to black people. Yeah.
Okay, cool. You described anti-blackness as a sliding scale. The Marquez evidence says that in the 19th and 20th century, Latinos in a lot of parts of the South were lynched at a higher rate than African Americans. How does anti-blackness as an analytic help us understand that? If it is
Anti-blackness as an analytic helps us understand that because it helps us understand the way that people who are brown were placed in proximity to criminality and lynched. Our argument is not that I guess it's weird to say that because there was more lynching, that means that like somehow it was worse for Latinos. Our argument is that anti-blackness provides a structure by which people can experience forms of violence. Those kind of moments of violence, those forms of
Right.
objective violence that you
But
can name, don't
you-
describe the way
You
that
described it
anti-blackness
as a
works.
sliding scale, and I guess that I'm curious what a sliding scale is, if not
The sliding
an account
scale
of
is
differing levels of violence within a structure.
The sliding scale is as simple as the way anti-blackness works is by associating black people with a lack of kinship relations, an openness to gratuitous violence, alienation, etc. That kind of darkness, the closer you are to blackness, then regulates you to a place where you can experience violence.
Okay,
The darker you are, the more
Wilderson
violence
piece
you
of evidence that you
experience.
read in the 2MC talks about pornotroping. I guess like I just want to kind of like establish whether you're going to like extend these pornotroping arguments. It talks about the way that descriptive accounts of black violence are what causes like this pathologization and also consumption of black suffering. Where do you think the 1AC was a descriptive artifact about black violence?
Our Wilderson evidence is making the argument that your kind of claims that we can relate to people through understanding suffering, through understanding things like we all have relationships in the world and somebody is mourned when somebody else dies, is that kind of commodification of black suffering, pain, etc. that our Wilderson evidence speaks
What
to.
does it mean for black people to exist outside of the world or outside of the hegemony of articulation, which I think is more MC evidence uses that?
It means that black people are never given access to the sorts of, I guess, like the forms of power and subjectivity that other people are granted under liberal
Why does
democracy.
somebody need
There's
to
not a
be
kind of
given access
resolution
to
to.
subjectivity? Like, why is subjectivity something that requires a, like, I guess, somebody to give it to you?
I mean, our argument is that under liberal democracy, the ability for somebody to make coherent demands relies upon the ability for them to be articulated and understood as somebody worth listening to. All of our evidence indicates that social death means that when black people speak, they are not heard. When black people make demands, those demands cannot kind of grapple with the loss of culture, heritage, etc. that happened during the
The
Middle Passage.
alternative is you described in the 2MC moment of realization. Who's like the agent doing the realizing?
Us. We are doing a paradigmatic analysis of the 1AC. We have determined
So like anybody regardless of subject position is doing the moment of realizing, right?
yes, we can all say
with
anti-blackness
this
is bad.
like sliding scale argument about proximity to blackness, like I guess I'm just like curious, like how do you determine who's most proximate to blackness? Like is it literally about like the visual scripting of
I mean, there's a
color?
lot of complicated things that go into determining what blackness is, but a really simple one is just the darker you are, the more subject to racial violence you are. Hang on, we'll take a moment. Sorry, but can you read it for me?
Yeah.
It's in the doc I sent out.
Okay.
Just the first one in the doc.
The first card in this document?
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
9:45. Not bad.
It's the critique and then the base page.
So on the critique, are you doing framework?
I'm just gonna start at the bottom and then eventually, yes.
Okay.
She's reading a card on the permutation.
I'm reading a card on the permutation. Yeah, yeah.
I'll let you know when I get it.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Does that sentiment speak for everyone in the room? All right. The illusion of provisions and protections of the slave's extraneous to actual agency, limited entitlements only serve to enhance the constraints of slavery, making personhood condeterminous with injury and criminality at the core of extending personhood to the slave's maintaining control over the slave department. And 97 power reside not only in the title to slave property, but the bonds of affection feelings repudiated, corrected, finds legitimate by law, the wedding of intimacy and violent domination as regulatory norms exemplifies the logic theory finds this is placed to mutual reciprocal desire of his concern for the welfare of the enslaved, the provisions granted and them should not be mistaken for rights, even when the entreaty made in the name of public good, acted minimally only half the enslaved did so by granting these limited entitlements in a manner which recognize black humanity in accordance with minimal standards of existence, the truncated construction of the slave as a person enhanced by making personhood coterminous with the injury of the dual, and the occasion of slave laws and expression of the multi-valence of subjectivity of the law continue to decriminalize the violence thought necessary to the preservation of the institutions submission and the obedience of slave to the soul, which granted the slave a circumscribed identity as a person and turns throughout the violence of beneficent and human gesture. And they're the that's the thing on the now framework. Endorse the team that provides the best epistemic orientation to liberating the slave. All their arguments about influencing policies and policies good. Our theory means there's no impact to any of this. Their bracy evidence says that ideological exchange fosters resentment, which disproves all of their arguments about how ethical discussions inspire more ethics. Instead, proves all of our truancy arguments about the nature of white backlash. That Trump follows Obama. That creating welfare just leads to the creation of the creation of the myth of the welfare queen, which means that seemingly ethical policies that we have don't result in broader ethical gestures that they can't quantify. It's the reason why you should be skeptical of all of their overview claims about inspiring a broader ethics of broader ethics of relationality. It's also a reason why this framework debate doesn't produce more radical discourses afterwards, rather shuts them down. And also, there's also a comfortability to said finding the debates based around the fear of white backlash is just a way to shut down a radical thought and ensure that any progressive politics just made at the behest of endorsing white supremacy never actually pose radical challenges. Now, also, another dissent to this interpretation is bureaucracy. Choosing between the lesser of the lesser evil within a bankrupt system is how states' disposability sustain themselves. You should refuse seductive calls to act and manage life, which rests on the murderous hoax of structurally violent parasitic arrangements. The guise of rationality makes us into survival brokers. Bauman and 13 rational people will go into a gas chamber if only they are allowed to be able to bathroom. We found their order on Fear 1. The SS would have needed more troops, arms, and money. Rationality is more effective, easier to pay, and cheaper thus to destroy. The SS men carefully cultivated rationality. Vector terror remains effective as long as the balloon of rationality is often prayed most sinister. Ruler must remain a staunch preacher of rationality or parents not to rule twisted the stakes of the game so the rationality of survival will render all the world with the motives of action and rational principles. Once survival called for non-resistance, the other destruction, the rationality pitched tougher against each other, made them and to the threat enemy of all of their sudden marked for death and granted them for the time being the role of bystanders. Next is political organizing. The one implicitly assumes a sovereign autonomous so to keep from making change in the world as long as we when certain subjects are unable to engage in governmental institutions in a non-violent manner, then their demands for freedom and governmental action or violent separation of people from their lived realities. It creates psychic violence because we always imagine our ideal selves to be something we literally can't be within the current socio-political order. It also makes relationality impossible. Paternalistic ethics prove that if we win the world as carceral, the notion that the carceral state can support black people is akin to saying slave masters caring for slaves by offering them food and shelter is a good thing. Paternalistic ethics nationalized anti-black schemes of relationality, which is libidinal economic violence and procedural logic trains police power in 16 to be as what future arms dealers are taught to engage in, how future prime ministers are taught to eradicate all residual human feelings, how judges are able to sleep at night, how powerful able to pretend that normal running of things is in any way fair, being trained to argue against anything so long as it persists in existing order. The definition of hell as the law is practiced by the state. Moral flexibility is a rhetorical lubricant that ensures the ruling class will always win. No one else will ever win the debate because the entire purpose of debates prevent anything truly disruptive from happening, all while masking real violence and being saying that anyone deviates from the rules, that is to say, sees the debate from the sham is displacing the imposed platform for the construction of the new world within the true base of all those who defend debate is real. Suddenly, those who are most powerful pretend they are under siege by those who are unreasonable. We see this lately in universities where those being with bigoted views pretend that they are forced to pull out because of the minutes of protest to the cities when politicians are responding to riots all over themselves, not to understand why people might resent being killed and harassed by police officers, but who never suffer any consequences. Now, case. The overview argument is a weighing question. Even if the desirability of the plan is relevant, we should first evaluate the affective dimensions of the 1AC. Our Dylan evidence indicates that the way that a social death and violence plays out is through intimate violence, through the mundane moments of humiliation, degradation, and which is what builds up to sustain the broader system of power, which means that if we want reasons why the affirmative made relationality impossible, and ensure anti-black schemes of relating to each other in the world, then it's a reason why you should vote negative because they are what enables the big structural enables the structure in the first place. The response to the Dylan evidence is something about the response to the Dylan evidence is about the ways that single pair can be different, but our Wertheimer evidence asks you to question these flat readings of the ways that they understand health disparities. Our argument is that health disparities occur more than just occur more outside of treatment. They also occur in things like mandatory prison reporting that occurs within prisons. It just funnel people back into the carceral system. That the ways that doctors will diagnose cancer or sore throat proves that even if treatment on face is better, there's still a lot of libidinal reasons why treatment ends up just treatment ends up just as bad. I've already answered all these mindset shift questions on the other pages. In our Burnett evidence, yes, you do report a result of more ICE deportations. The Fisher evidence says that we have an ethical obligation not to have doctors report legal status to patients, but that doesn't take into account what our Burnett evidence says about ICE just camping out around hospitals, following and harassing migrants and funneling them into deportation systems. Anyways, the idea of sanctuary hospitals isn't something that exists, and it isn't a consequence of the plan. They have to win their broader spillover claims of relationality to be able to access any of this. Now, the PCP's argument, you're a 1AC evidence you flagged for neoliberal language anyways. It uses language like people smugglers. There's a reason why we shouldn't trust it either. If one source can poison the whole, if one source can poison the whole thing, and increasing the number of insured actually impedes care to steal, and 15, increasing the availability of healthcare increases the burden on fragile system by demanding care of more patients than the system has capacity to support. The expansion of insurance does not guarantee care at all. The system is understressed because the aging population's large-term physicians retire. Demand increases as this trend, availability of services will decrease, ensuring a larger amount of people does not consider the number of physicians will provide the service. Increasing the amount of insurance patients impedes a physician's ability to provide care. The increase in access doesn't matter if the access goes away and all the primary care providers quit, because whatever healthcare system is left, people can't access without primary care physicians.
All right, we have 10.
case, then okay. Let me just find my overview. Good.
Two top-level impacts of the affirmative were conceded by the block. Number one is sovereign. Violence is causing death, world is strangling the world, and military violence because of the ability of the state to define inside and outside. Outside cause global military violence to protect what we see as our country from violent migrants. Number two is a lack of healthcare for migrants, which compounds the inherent violence, the violence of migration, causes leads to more structural violence. The health insurance is necessary prerequisite to a better health outcomes, which is the one to see Edwards represents the couple of affect arguments at the top of the flow are answered by the alien more than Matthew Evans says the law can shape affect. Matthew Evans says there are psychological studies which say that when the law treats a certain group as one group instead of two groups, it changes the place of makes people more likely to conceive themselves as members of a group rather than an in-group or an out-group. The argument about ICE and the border patrol, etc. Spillover matters. The Kells evidence says we can use that as a jumping off point for a broader critique of the border regime, the ability of the sovereign to define the inside and outside, the distribution of public goods, the international evidence that can explicitly extend to the border patrol by allowing us to contest the way that the border patrol feels right to go to hospitals and deport people, etc. You shouldn't stop with the plan test, but I think the plan cultivates one of relationality, understanding ourselves as coming into being in relation to the others, which changes our subjectivity, the way we interact with the broader political system. Does also take out the affirmative picture ever since the hospitals are designating themselves as sensitive zones and using basically sanctuary hospitals to stop ICE from being in hospitals, so immigrants can still get health care to the extent that deportation continue to some degree. The affirmative doesn't solve it, and the affirmative is still net beneficial over the steps. The next couple arguments about insurance being bad, they made some reference to one card having a bad term, and I don't even know what the word they used was. I don't know which card you should reject for that. You should reject this, but that's not a reason to reject the affirmative. The insurance bad arguments. They can see the plan increases payment because it increases public health and universal public health insurance means the doctors get reimbursed way more because the government is shelling out money for everybody's health insurance. A much more financial incentive to go into primary care because you're getting paid a bunch of money by the government to do so. Second, it doesn't take out the affirmative. Edward says health insurance for immigrants is specifically necessary too because they can go to a doctor. They can go to a doctor, but they leave the emergency room after they get emergency care because emergency care is the only thing mandated under federal law to be given to immigrants. The plan allows them to stay in the hospital longer and get other care. The argument about prisons and carceral systems, etc., was answered by the spillover argument at the top of the flow. Not sure why that's a link to the affirmative. If we win the rest of our arguments about challenging the overall system of sovereignty, the critique overview, only a couple quick arguments here. Cruel optimism assumes a faith in liberal progress, which is not the affirmative. It doesn't assume that the status quo being transformed just by appealing to invading sort of naively appealing institutions, rather continuing the demand for the breakdown of sovereignty. More broadly, the argument about gratuitous freedom will be answered when I extend the alternative arguments at the bottom of the flow. Now, framework use and vote affirmative the plan's a good idea. The answer the basic thesis and the basic evidence says that considering the conflicts of policies necessary to hold the mirror up and reveal the hypocrisy of the status quo with the way that they're particularly materialized based on individual interest in material frameworks. Their framework combines analysis of policy actions, which is theoretically bankrupt consequences of policies matter, which we taught to understand their particularities. It's not a white backlash argument at the top of the one that doesn't make any sense. It's argument the role that consequences and material interest interact to shape the results of policies. They're bound cards about Nazis and relation and rationality, which is another argument that one sees in pure rationality rather than ethic of relationality that understands ourselves as coming into being in relation to others, but also understands the role of policy in shaping that affect. This power card is about basically conservatives in the UK. It's not the same as the app, which is taking a pretty radical approach to the status quo and doesn't assume our interpretation, which allows radical alternatives to be proposed by the negative and related to the consequences of the affirmative. Our framework does not separate people from their lived experience or their individual understandings. We think that policy can shape those understandings and those experiences and the consequences of that policy should be debated. The next argument about sovereignty being in relation to blackness is not a link argument. This is an argument for the affirmative why sovereignty is currently defined in relation to those we see as outside, both implicitly and explicitly, both textually and not textually. The affirmative critique of that overall system, which changes the way we understand our ability to define who is inside and outside. As proven by the Tuesday Little Evans and the Marquez Evans, the argument about cruel optimism and so on assumes a liberal faith in progress, which is not the affirmative. The pornotroping consumptions of black flesh arguments link more to them because it's two white people going for wilderness, and also not true. Fusco in 17. This is the way people always seek to profit from black everything necessary down and serving cultural property, presumes an ability to speak for all black people, really serve black women, black artists have also been crucial social capital and commercial gains for the treatment of black suffering, others have been recovery receiving and encouraging assassination, who have found more claims to the community. The alternative to speak for black culture is not guarantee vesting and think reductive and inaccurate to claim all trade black suffering, what produces more racism and same system abolitions, use progress to denounce inherent humanity is everything. I argue that any type of way produces to engage racism and sexual black face unacceptable foreclosing anti-racial conscious things that this falls more nuanced if I would free to not impute intent. Mark that card to 10. The sort of extra textuality arguments are not true. The playing move beyond textualism because the Cal's evidence explicitly says that the plan's call can be one that moves beyond this particular circumstances and into our broader relationality of understanding ourselves as coming into being in a relationship with people that we currently see as outside ourselves. The permutation, you can do the plan and understand the particular value of healthcare for non-citizens and understand that there are processes of fungibility that exceed that. Healthcare is not separate because the entire affirmative also understands the incoherence or the ability, the necessity of dwelling in black life. It doesn't link to any of their humanism arguments. I'll impact towards one of those humanist arguments in a second, but their Hartman evidence is about giving things to literal slaves in an attempt to maintain control, which is empirically and causally distinct from the affirmative. It's not a coalition that demands liberal inclusion, or the police, or it's not a coalition that demands the policing of black people. The rollback arguments we're mostly in because the one you see is the exact opposite of what backlash arguments be outside rollback because we can defend whether or not the plan should occur necessary for affirmative offense. The immigration link, we've linked toward it because the entire point of the evidence that we shouldn't use deservingness to frame access to healthcare. We said everyone here should get healthcare. The Turhan and Kel's evidence explicitly rejects the frame of giving people healthcare because they're economically productive. It's linked towards the argument about anti-black, pro-immigrant sentiment. Now you said in the Gordon evidence it's impossible to have totally closed knowledge of the human because all human systems are incomplete and overextended. The alternative overrides previous liberation struggles based on finding new spaces within the position of the human. Radical humanism is good because you put our energy into radical humanism that situates itself in the world, which doesn't rely on traditional liberal humanism, rather expands its focus to understand ourselves as coming into being in relation with the other and understand the value of that relationality for human flourishing, which grounds ourselves in the world rather than dwelling in black suffering. So to answer the argument about shifting from slavery to Jim Crow is because the system has shifted in particular circumstances defined by material interest in those circumstances, which we should understand, which is why our framework argument is good and why you cannot assume that the system is always the same. It also proves that the alternative fails because it dwells in blackness. What's up?
Can you answer the slide scale argument and say that the proximity to blackness...
Proximity to blackness is wrong, and Marquez evidence says that there's violence against immigrants that's uniquely distinct from violence against black people. We should understand this causally distinct and focusing purely on the blackness as the locus of that fails.
Alright, I'll give 9:45.
9:45.
debate through the lens of anti-black schemes of relationality. Or Dylan Evans says that mundane moments are where social death is felt, to treat the in-ground moments where they have perpetuated anti-black thought or instances of the affirmative enacting social death and violence which have more proximity and take precedent over theoretical out there impacts. Now, our white backlash arguments are recently should be skeptical of their broader mindset shift or ethics arguments like giving welfare inspires the welfare queen. Overburdening hospitals is more likely to make doctors resent the patients, giving them long hours, not do extra work to protect them from ICE Fisher. Only speaks to doctors not disseminating data to Border Patrol agents, not what Burnett says about ICE staking out hospitals in order to deport people now, refuse their purely statistical claims that single payer makes things better. Things like doctors who diagnose cancers of sore throat per Dylan Evans prove that data and health reporting are biased, and anti-black mandatory reporting laws also just funnel anti-black patients into prisons. Okay. The affirmative starts from a question of whether or not health insurance is a good idea, but we have questioned the basis of health and care, how we understand how health and care operate, who has health and what care is. The ontology debate should frame the debate around civil society maintains itself through endpoints or material products that continue the unfreedom of blackness. The alternative seeks to disrupt that, or refuse forms of progress. You should wallow in the impossibility of gratuitous freedom. Slavery leads to Jim Crow, leads to the prison industrial complex. All of these shifts are structured around natal alienation, generalist on gratuitous fines, which crisps black people according to their flesh, in opposition to the human liberal democratic stomach, which is what creates anti-blackness, a sliding scale through which people are evaluated. AKA, the closer you are to blackness, the darker your skin color is, the more forms of racial terror that you experience. They have not presented an alternative explanation for why civil society shifts from one form of anti-black violence to the next. Why this kind of system of slavery only changes in name but not in function, which means you should default to our theoretical understanding of how the world operates. Now, all of our link arguments prove the permutation is a bad idea, that they are not the sort of radical humanism that they have described. Now, our first link to the 1AC is relationality. Their attempt to form radical bonds via a sort of intersectional multiculturalism and a relational approach to grief, which are their Turner and Klett evidence. This is what the 1AR says a lot about relationality. It relies upon a humanism formed by ripping relationality from the slave, a rendering of the body into flesh, which precedes relational categories like familial ties, aka the reason why slaves could be sold away from their family members on a whim at the plantation, or the reason why the police officer doesn't think about Trayvon or Renisha's family or friends before they pull the trigger. The only way that their evidence can describe that relationality, the relationality they keep referencing, is a form of kinship which has always already been ripped away from black folk. If you read their piece of evidence, they indicate that relationality is experienced through the kind of recognition of a common suffering. All of our evidence indicates that non-black people are not able to comprehend or have a commonality with the suffering of black people because it is a kind of objective vertigo rather than a form of subjective vertigo. Now, the impact is the commodification of black pain. Black suffering is paraded. Black people are turned into bodies and rendered inert to the sort of unconsensual assumptions about black social life and social death. aka black pain operates to articulate whatever political demands non-black people feel like they should make it, that feel like they can make in the moment. Also means their affirmative leads to coalitions that grapple with black folk because they never have a model of relationality that can grapple with the events of slavery or the events of the Middle Passage. The flip side of that is just that they can't fathom black kinship relations, which means their method entirely excludes black people, which proves that the extra-textual approach or the extra-textual portions of the affirmative are bad and you should not include them via a permutation. Now, even if the 1AC does material good, they rely upon an anti-black grammar, which is bad, at least in forms of humanism that cause exclusion, policing, welfare violence, social death, etc. Instead, the alternative challenge is that there's a kind of common metric or relationality that makes all of us human, and instead rethinks the world through a grammar of loss. We also have a reason that the plan itself is a bad idea, which is our immigration link to the 1AC, which asks you to consider what it means to be a citizen, not a person. What does it mean that black people are textually coded within the Constitution as citizens, but they are not granted the rights of citizenship, aka they are not innocent until proven guilty, but rather guilty until proven innocent. The idea that immigrants can simply be included into that category, given equal access to health, given a universal solution, is just a kind of articulation of the way that those kinds of forms of relationality, those forms of loss can be repaired for the immigrant, but the black suffix is always outside those forms of relationality, aka you cannot repair the violence that happened during the Middle Passage. There's not a kind of reparative measure that can be taken like the elimination of borders or the inclusion into citizenship. The impact of that is pro-immigrant sentiments that are anti-black, perpetuate stereotypes of lazy black people. The alternative, no one-area answer to the alternative, refuse, calls for progress, wallow
in the impossibility or the lack of blackness, refuse to repair or material reprieve. Only that creates the possibility for gratuitous freedom and a radically different conception of being which departs from the presumption of wholeness or relation as the basis for humanity. The framework arguments, you should endorse the team that provides the best epistemic orientation to liberate the slaves. All their arguments that influence policy, assume that policy is a good thing. Our theory means there's no impact to any of this, and are all a reason why their forms of policy are bad. We have a link to the plan text, which means that this framework debate shouldn't matter much to how you decide the round. Now their move to a textual solution is bad because it presumes text has anything to do with how the world is structured. Text of citizenship only means things to non-black people. We are also not pornotroping. We have no intense descriptions of black suffering. The alternative, so we don't ever talk about the fact that anti-blackness exists, which is probably networks. They're wanting our physical evidence. Yes, voyeurism exists. This evidence only cites 19th century abolitionists work as good. Those people use black suffering to help incorporate black people into liberal democracy, which the entirety of my overview proves a bad thing. Now this last piece of Gordon Adams, they concede that Gordon is about ontology, not political ontology. That the alternative, that the criticism is about political ontology, the way that anti-blackness is made by endorsing forms of liberal humanism, which are linked to the affirmative and the idea, and the reason the alternative could do something. The act maintains those forms of anti-blackness which Gordon criticizes. It changes how anti-blackness operates because those are all the link arguments that I made at the top.
359.
alternative, we remember that strict plain focus argument. This is better because it allows us, because the material, because every theory can have a number of different material consequences in different contextual situations, and that means that they homogenize the kind of different consequences that it can occur now. That means that the alternative cannot solve any of the affirmative critique. Absolute negation doesn't induce any paradigm shift or transformable grammars. Chris did have a line on this in the 1AR, even though I cut him off and then said you should answer the sliding scale argument. He did say the alternative cannot solve that because it doesn't have any sort of those political projects that Matthews and any sort of board deputies will say that positive transformations of resistance have to be tied to specific objectives and projects that are often grounded in law. Now next, now we're going to go to the sovereignty link. The alternative cannot account for the violence experienced by non-citizens. The plan is a better analytic for that, also enriches understanding of anti-blackness. So we win this portion of the debate. It means that this is an a priori portion of the debate, even before the ontology debate, because it disproves anti-blackness as a structure, which is a prior question to evaluating whether that anti-black structure is ontological and proves. We have provided a critique of both textual and non-textual ways that categories of legitimate violence are constructed. This is that benefits the permutation, which understands the unique way sovereignty has on unique impact sovereignty has on anti-black violence, but says that this is compatible with understanding of some violence that will be experienced at life that sovereignty is incoherent with the current grammar. But even the fact that that violence can be partially accounted for and informed by other systems proves those systems are transformable and recoverable. The sliding scale cannot solve this because the levels of violence that Latinos experience cannot be accounted for by their proximity to blackness. The charter explicitly lays out a kind of equation that the closer you are to anti-blackness, the more of that violence you experience with that linear relationship. Doesn't make any sense. The higher relate the Latino in the 19th and 20th century, the gratuitous violence experienced against Latinos who are getting shot in the park by the police, and the way that Haitian immigrants experience violence stemming from natives and anti-blackness when they're supposed to go back to Africa simultaneously. There's overlap divisions within the anti-both and black populations, such as the existence of black nativist organizations. This, we also contest that we contest the narrative of deservingness and liberal inclusion, which means we don't link to those arguments. Currently, less human citizens are given legitimacy based on the status of deservingness. The plan says that deservingness should not be a category for receiving healthcare, which means it breaks down those stereotypes, which means it resolves this impact. The that is a net benefit to the permutation. That permutation is able to solve and understand the unique effect of sovereignty has on anti-black violence, but says that it is compatible with understanding that some violence of black experience of life sovereignty is incoherent in the grammar. The permutation is not 0 to 100, but it's the combination of understanding the theories of anti-blackness and the theories of sovereignty as matches to the plan is more useful than you should prefer that analytic, given that the alternative cannot explain those differential violences that exist in the real material life situation of barrios. The permutation solves universality because it says that there are non-universal forms of violence that differentially impact people. That's also the exact position the app is taken, because we say that precarity is differentially impacted. The relationality or third link arguments are based on a total mischaracterization of relationality. All of the 186 evidence describes moving away from status quo humanism towards a form of relationality that is bottom up and historically situated, which means that kinship between everybody, but it means that kinship can occur in black communities, and that creates agency in and of itself. And the 186 taken from the beginning, that precarity is not a category that is universally distributed, which means we're not that sort of liberal multiculturalism, but all of our ontology arguments will prove that agency can be created. We're not commodification because we're not commodification because there's no way that commodification can enact. They've been providing you descriptive accounts of the way that because we don't exist in coalitions, there's nothing to commodify. The anti-black grammar argument, all the app produces the grammar is necessary to contest that sovereignty. The immigration inclusion arguments I already answered. The last argument we answered that technically is the link is the voyeurism argument. They conceded that they linked to it harder and that you shouldn't imbue intent on us, which means that their intent over one example is bad. The ontology debate, you should write their framing of blackness as absolute derivation. It's methodologically incoherent. Gordon evidence does account for political ontology and says that all systems are inherently open because they rely on those individual people to continue reinforcing them, even if political events have made them and stretched. Their Wilderson evidence all relies on sloppy theorizing. Their argument about political ontology doesn't change that. Gordon explicitly makes an argument that we should refound political humanism based on a vision of human liberation and common flourishing. They've also never explained that distinction particularly well, which matters since their ontology arguments are simple and not nuanced. Their framing overrates the history of liberation struggles like the Haitian Revolution, which is explicitly based on a refounding definition of human and finding cracks and fishing traditional systems. This means that we are not a linear progress with the understanding that violence does need to be struggled against constantly because it does research.
Fair enough.
The decision is a 3-0 for the affirmative from Northwestern. I'll go really quick. I voted F because I thought the F one was some combination of no link to whatever you extended or turn to the links that you did extend that I understood. Most of the links, I would confess, I had trouble understanding, primarily the relationality thing. And it didn't help that to me the 2NR was very hard to follow. I had a lot of trouble placing the arguments on the page, and that meant maybe I missed some things, but I was having trouble mapping things down. But in short, I think the F successfully sort of shifts the terms of the debate and wins that they are an effective critique of sovereignty that has a chance of confronting anti-blackness. And I don't think the negative ever catches up on this strategic move by the affirmative, which is to like not talk about healthcare at all and just say, no, we're an internal link towards a critique of sovereignty. Who cares what happens in the healthcare system? Yeah, immigrants should have care, but we're really about a critique of sovereignty. And you start off the debate pushing them there in the cross-X and earlier on, but by the end of the debate, that's not a focus of the negative, and it's really what they're putting their eggs in that basket. And so I think the kind of links that you did extend, I didn't think stuck. So like I said, the relationality link, I just will confess that I don't know what is going on here. Like, I don't know what kinship, like I understand your arguments that black people's kinships have been deprived and all that stuff, but I just didn't, like I know that the app says they're promoting a kind of relationality, but it's not like relationality good, bad. It's just they say we establish a particular relationship to the other via our critique of sovereignty. So like it's a very specific account of a kind of relation that they create. And I just didn't see how that mapped on. I thought you were doing better on the inclusion link earlier in the debate, although less so towards the end. Like the Hartman card that you read on the permutation that says like humanizing the slave, like that, you know, I don't know that they had a, if you had made a lot out of that in the 2NR, maybe there would have been something else here, but I kind of thought they were still winning, that their ethic of confronting solvency sort of pushes back on inclusion, that they're not about inclusion, they're about breaking sovereignty. So a more robust defense by the negative that the AF is liberal would help you a lot. But I don't really think you win that. I think they win that they're a critique of liberalism. And lastly is the commodification link, or pornotroping, which I thought was fairly underdeveloped, and I don't know if it's true, because they don't have an impact about disparities as of the 1AC. Now, I know that maybe some of the 2AC anyway, so some more clarity from you on which cards and which advantages are something that you think the app is using that links to this would help. The last comment is I thought that perhaps the direction that the block should have gone in is that emphasize the race neutrality links, because that I think is a better description of the app than that it tries to incorporate black people into the healthcare system, because that's not really what it's trying to do. So I thought if the block had focused in on they are liberal and they are race neutral, then we're in a good place. But as is, I think they kind of win turns to both of those.
I can go. I also vote F on the permutation. I agree a lot with Tripp. I focus primarily on the ontology debate, though, because I think that that's where a good portion of this came down to. I think that they've won that blackness, or at least the structure of anti-blackness, is not ontological, and as a system has the capacity to be open to change. I think that the F is better on this question than better on the question of this court and evidence. I think that your response is kind of like this is talking about ontology versus political ontology, and absent reading the evidence, I have no warrant as to why that's true or what the distinction. I understand what the distinction is too, but I need you to be doing more work in the 2NR. And early on as a 2NC too, to be making these delineations in terms of what I should be prioritizing on. I also think that your description of anti-blackness at the top of the 2NR just needs to be way more detailed. I think that I try to go through my flow, and I don't have a compelling place in the 2NR where you're winning the social debt debate to me. And so I think that absent that, I mean, you have descriptions about like, you know, the impossibility of blackness, you know, the opposition to flesh, and I think that the 2NC was a little bit better on this question, but the 2NR is just like very lacking in terms of robustly winning, compellingly winning that debate for me. And so I think if you lose the ontology debate, that complicates your link arguments to a large degree. I think that they've won then that, you know, the situated historical understanding of relationality is capable of producing new humanism, which I don't think that you have an answer to outside of winning a link argument, right? Because you're like, sure, new humanisms could be good, but you're not that because of the link debate. I think that you need to do a few things. One, win the link debate, or win a link to the new humanisms that the 1AC produced, right? Because I also just don't know what those new humanisms are, right? They could be anything. They could be the old humanisms. things, right? And I think you're getting to gesturing towards that with the link arguments, but you just need to do a little bit better. So I also couldn't really follow the direction of this relationality argument. I think that a more compelling iteration of this would be to say that relationality necessitates a few things. One is that, and I think you're getting to these in different parts of the 2NR. I think that you just need a coherent place where you're just describing the connections between the gaps that I'm kind of having. So I think the first to say is to tie this notion of relationality to some of your other arguments that you're like kind of making about like loss, right? So like the type of relationality that they produce necessitates a universal relationship to loss, right? Which does things like assume notions of property and ownership or possession over of the body or of material goods that one has to then lose, right? I think that your arguments about, you know, capacity and anti-blackness necessitates a critique of notions of property relations, right? Which seems to be embedded in the very concept of loss, and the ability to mourn, right? And I think that the second thing that you could do, what you're doing in a different part of the debate that I also didn't understand, which is that it necessitates the establishment of affective bonds, right? Which is also just a huge link into an Afro-pest-based criticism. And so I think that if that's how you kind of conceptualize these relationality arguments, and it means that the type of new humanisms that they produce will rely on the same affective investments and attachments to a notion of liberal subjectivity that has to be there for any type of relational bonds to be established across difference, right? And so I think that if that's kind of how you conceptualize it, becomes a little more easier. I also then think that the AF is not about inclusion of non-citizens, right? I think that they are very clear on, you know, we're about the abolition of the concept of citizenship and the concept of sovereignty. So it's not necessarily about bringing non-citizens in to a notion of, you know, liberal democracy, but it's about abolishing that concept altogether and just being basically open to everybody functionally. And so these liberal inclusionism arguments, I would need more specific work done on how the 1AC would to do that. And I think you're getting there again at cross-X, but just a little bit better. Another thing that I think that you could do is you have some of the arguments earlier on, especially in cross-X of the 1AC, about why focusing on questions of sovereignties and borders is anti-black, right? Because I think that then becomes a land-based project that doesn't get at the antagonism, but addresses conflictual process that produces contingent modes of unfreedom versus, you know, gratuitous notions of freedom, if that makes sense, versus, you know, structural modes of dereliction. Then I think that makes some of your proximity to blackness arguments makes a lot more sense, and then I think that the types of relationality that they produce are based in a land-based project, which will descend arguments about cartographic anti-blackness would then be applicable to, but that all rests on, I think, you still needing to win the social debt debate. For you all, I think that a place that you could have been better in the 2AR and 1AR is kind of expanding and impacting out these arguments about like homogenization a little bit more specifically in the context of your Haitian example, right? Because if it's true that there is a texturized nature to anti-blackness, then it means that the experience of Haitian immigrants is drastically different than the experiences of Black Americans, right? Even if you can see that they're still affected by the larger structure of anti-blackness or, you know, U.S.-based notions of racism, it means that the materiality of that violence is distinct, right? And so what you need to say is we need to then produce an analytic that's capable of theorizing those complexities, which is only done through an establishment of a notion of relationality versus a totalizing nature of their theoretical framework. Because what that does is that gives you more credence to the permutation and also gives you, again, a stronger DA to the alternative, if that makes sense.
I suppose the part where maybe I differ is that I'm a little more sympathetic to your link arguments. I'm suspicious of their claims to eliminate sovereignty in the sense that, and I really had wished that you would push harder on this earlier in the debate, in the sense that the sovereign institution opts out of sovereignty seems to be a reaffirmation of their right to sovereignty, right? I mean, I'm kind of with you on that idea, you know, and I think that should have been a bigger element of taking out their case claim. I also, you know, maybe I felt differently about the relationality link. I felt a little more comfortable with that link argument too. The idea of and you know, maybe I'm just sort of making it up as I go, but I sort of felt like, you know, the idea of their inclusion in universality was based upon a sense of understanding each other in a kinship relationship, which isn't available to black people. And I sort of if that's the articulation of that, then if I'm right about that, then I felt more comfortable with that as a link argument. So I'm sympathetic with more of your link arguments, maybe, and sort of intrinsically skeptical of some of the arguments that you're making about why that's not true. But the part of the problem is I think that you just sort of give up on some of this stuff later on in the debate. Like I don't think it's manifestly obvious why they solve this sovereignty ethic, or why they get to just like tack on this ethical framework where they get to be like, so say we do this little not little, but medium-sized policy thing, but guess what? We also get to wish away all of the DAs to us, right? So your questions are, how are you a significant attack upon sovereignty in a context in which sovereignty is reasserted all over the place? Aren't you really just a reaffirmation of that sovereignty? That question makes a ton of sense, but sort of doesn't really make it into the end. And so you just hand them all of their AF. And when you hand them all of their AF, to me, the problem is that what you have is you have some link arguments to a potential solvency, like they don't solve for this group of people, but I don't see how your alternative resolves any of the AF, or how it resolves really any of your arguments at all. I mean, I think kind of you're already at the end point. Without being pressed, you're already at the end point. You're like, there's only a risk that we can solve anti-blackness. I mean, maybe we could be a little bit more maybe it's the wrong word, but maybe a little bit stronger about like how that would work out, right? So even if you win some link arguments about why they maybe reaffirm anti-blackness, or why they would be incapable of solving the basic structure of anti-blackness, I think that they win that they've solved something else, sovereignty, and not because it makes a lot of sense, but because you've let them do that. And so if they solve the sovereignty issue, then they solve the exclusion of a large group of people that really aren't really connected to the way that you describe anti-blackness. Like I don't think that you connect your description of anti-blackness about why they wouldn't be able to solve for this other group of people who I think that they're ahead of you on as having a separate articulation of it. So this is kind of the sliding scale argument. I think that they're ahead on their description that the basis of exclusion or oppression is not based entirely upon the sliding scale as you describe it, but there's actually some separate things going on. So ultimately, while you might have somewhat of a solvency takeout and maybe even a little bit of a DA that I don't really see where the uniqueness would come from it on, it's not sufficient to generate a overwhelming set of offense. And this is a different way of describing the same thing to describe it, except for the fact that I feel a little bit more sympathetic to the link arguments you make. I do want to reaffirm that I didn't quite understand why the 2NR decided to functionally disengage from the debate and sort of just be like, I'm going to make arguments. Because I think that tactical choice to disengage just sort of let a lot of their arguments slip through as uncontested. And I think that they chose in the 2AR to not do that, in the sense that you were sort of like, here's all the arguments we're going to make. And I don't think if it had been better engaged with their arguments, I think the debate would have been a lot closer. And I did think it was a really good choice not to follow them down this hole. I mean, I know that's your practice as a whole, but to sort of be like, okay, we're not going to do that. We're going to be like, you said this, we said this, things like that. And I think it made it really easy to sort of compare the rebuttals in a way that was really unhelpful for you and was really helpful for you. I think it would put a lot more pressure on the 2AR if you had been a lot more on top of their stuff. Because sometimes it felt like you were like, here's the argument we're making, and I'm looking at it and being like, this is a contested argument, and so you have to answer the contested element of it, but you're sort of describing it as if the debate's over and you're sort of summarizing it. And so if you had contested a lot more of the debate, I think it would have been much more difficult to formulate the 2AR, and much more, and it would have made the 2AR much less efficient, because they would have had to go through stuff instead of just being like, you didn't answer a bunch of stuff. You said this, but you didn't answer a bunch of stuff we said. Here's what we said. That debate's over. It would be much more difficult for them to get through all the stuff they wanted to do. And so, I guess the two biggest things that I would think for you is, don't sort of give up the ghost on their case on that they solve sovereignty. Push harder on on your sort of basic instincts that you had at the beginning of the debate about why I don't think their app kind of makes sense, so why do they get to wish away all of this stuff by just attaching an ethic to it, where they're like, oh, sure, that would be a consequence of that's how it would really work out, but we have an ethic, right, that would say that we don't like that stuff. We would protest that as well, right? I just don't think that's sufficient, especially considering their thing is about sort of pragmatic policy issues. So don't let that go, and engage in the 2 hour. The debate's a lot closer.
Just a question about that last thing. Obviously, I didn't do this, but like, would it actually just be like, this is absurd, this is decided to be such an actor that
I mean, not
implies
just
they
saying
have
that,
a sovereign power?
but a well-developed, like 30 to 45 seconds on that comes from a 1 to 2 minute explanation in the block. Yeah, no, I don't think
I'm
it's
wondering what I
simple.
say for 1 to 2 minutes about that. Like, my gut instinct is like, that is
Well,
wild,
go
but
to Supreme Court decisions about executive self-restraint and about the impossibility of a sovereign to limit itself. There's also, like, the people who talk about Schmidt will analyze this argument. So, like, your argument is logical and it is made in literature, I think. So, I think you'll find a lot of evidence for this.
And why doesn't your alt do this better? I don't understand. Like, if your alt is better described, why doesn't your alt do all these things better? Right? Like, I mean, like, I'm always, I mean, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's really unlikely that they do this, and it's really likely that your alt, if it was better described, if I understood it, by the way, if I understood it, it would be a lot more. But it seems on face. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah. My other question is like, was this shift here to everybody else of which we see? Because, okay.
To like, we're a K of sovereignty, we're not
Just
about
like,
healthcare.
yeah,
That was clear as of the 1AC to me.
I knew it
Yeah.
was there in the one AC. I don't. Okay.
All right, and maybe just a little bit more pushback and cross-sex of the 1AC, right? Because Pauline is like, look, there's a difference between using institutions and then challenging sovereign power, right? It's like, well, wait a minute, let's talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah.
Right, that's the portion of the debate that I think that we're saying you need to situate yourself in more, right?
And that dovetails with an ethic doesn't confront sovereignty either. Those two arguments supplement each other.
Because you have like right all the instincts. It's like, well, that kind of sounds just like democracy, and I'm like, kind of true, kind of a little bit.
Right.
Yeah. Right. It's like you have all the right instincts. It's like just pair that with your larger Afro-pessimism.